The manuscript was bound in flaking goat hide, its brittle pages smelling of salt and dust. It had been locked away in the vaults beneath the Biblioteca Marciana for centuries, mislabeled as a treatise on astrological rituals from the Renaissance. It wasn't until Professor Elias Voss, an eccentric scholar of lost geography and esoteric cartography, requested access to the archive that anyone thought to open it. His request was simple. He was looking for visual references to pre-flood civilizations. What he found instead, buried in the margins of an otherwise mundane astrological chart, was a map, faint, faded, nearly lost to time. But unlike any known chart in the modern world, it depicted an arrangement of islands and coastlines that matched no known geography. One word had been inscribed in a language older than Greek: Atlantis. Voss brought the manuscript into the light, scanning each page under multispectral imaging. What appeared under ultraviolets astonished him. Beneath the overlaid symbols of planetary houses was a second layer of ciphered script, hidden deliberately, visible only under certain light spectrums. This was no ordinary treatise. It was an encoded document, a palimpsest of esoteric knowledge veiled beneath astrological language. The hidden text mentioned an ancient city, swallowed by the sea but not forgotten by the stars. It gave coordinates in a format obsolete for over 1,000 years and referenced a device known only as the Needle of Chronos. A tool, it said, that sees not only place but time. As Voss dug deeper, one name appeared repeatedly: Magister Aurelius Thorn, a 16th-century alchemist who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Historical records claimed Thorn had been excommunicated for heretical experiments involving celestial geometries and Atlantean fire, but this manuscript bore his sigil, an Ouroboros coiled around an inverted star, and detailed the travels of a secret society known as the Linea Eterna. They had devoted themselves to preserving the remnants of a pre-human civilization lost in the last great flood. Their doctrine was simple: knowledge must be hidden but not destroyed. Encode the truth, the text read, so that only the worthy may unearth it. According to Thorn's encrypted account, he had traced a series of ancient monoliths across North Africa and the Mediterranean, each one positioned according to stellar alignments from 12,000 years ago. The manuscript indicated that these monuments were not random, but functioned as a triangulated network, a map projected across time itself. When Voss overlaid the coordinates onto a spherical map calibrated to glacial year sea levels, a singular pattern emerged. At the convergence point was a sunken ridge off the Azores, long dismissed as geological coincidence. But there, nestled in the seafloor's topography, was the faint imprint of concentric circles, the same pattern Plato described. By now, Voss was no longer working alone. A covert team had assembled, experts in archaeoacoustics, symbolic linguistics, and remote viewing. Some were scientists, others were not. One, a former Vatican archivist named Cardinal Rafe, had brought with him a fragment of obsidian engraved with the same sigil found in Thorn's manuscript. According to Rafe, it had been recovered from beneath the Basilica di San Clemente, hidden behind a false wall built by Templars in the 12th century. He whispered of a Vatican map room that had been sealed since 1799, containing scrolls that referenced Atlantis as a real city, but one sealed by covenant, guarded by time. It was Rafe who first warned Voss of the glyph on the last page, a spiral within a spiral intersected by 7 lines. This, he said gravely, is a seal of occlusion. It means someone or something does not want this knowledge returned to the surface. But Voss was already too deep. He had found references to the Nocturnum Codex, a companion text believed lost in the burning of the Library of Alexandria, yet the manuscript claimed it was not destroyed, only hidden, locked within salt and silence, guarded by the dead. The phrase echoed in Voss's mind. Was it metaphor? Or did it refer to something beneath the ocean itself? The next phase of the journey brought them to Madeira, There, in a cave system recently unearthed by a minor quake, they found petroglyphs unlike any native art. Angular spirals and concentric circles etched with unnatural precision. Using Thorne's map and a laser resonance scanner, they discovered a harmonic anomaly, a standing wave that had no natural origin. It was a frequency, humming at 111 hertz, the so-called sacred tone. When exposed to the vibration, a previously invisible inscription glowed on the cave wall. It was a warning: only those who remember the flood may pass. The team pressed forward, guided now by more than science, by a growing sense of something watching. Elias began to dream of submerged towers and a great bell tolling beneath the sea. Rafe began reciting Latin phrases he claimed not to know. Devices malfunctioned. One night a seismic reading instrument recorded rhythmic pulses from beneath the seafloor, perfectly timed, as if from a machine, or a heartbeat. Then the water level in the cave inexplicably dropped, revealing a black stone platform carved with an ancient calendar. It ended abruptly at 10,500 BC. On the final page of the manuscript, written in a trembling hand, was a single phrase: "They still walk beneath." No further context, no identification of who they were. But it was clear now that this map was more than geographic. It was a trigger, a countdown, a prophecy encoded in star paths and sea trenches, and Voss had just set it in motion. The cave trembled, the standing wave intensified, and somewhere, far beneath their feet, something shifted. And as the manuscript dissolved in his hands, its ink reacting violently to the exposure of air and time, Elias Voss realized the map had never been meant to guide explorers to Atlantis. It had been designed to keep something inside. The prison was mistaken for a grave, but the dead were never buried. The tremors faded, but the silence that followed was worse. It was not the silence of peace, but of attention. Something ancient and vast had noticed them. Elias Voss stood frozen at the obsidian platform, his hands still trembling from the dissolution of the manuscript. Its ink had vanished into the air like smoke, leaving behind only a faint smell of salt and myrrh. The glyphs carved into the walls around him now glowed faintly, alive with some unseen energy, and his thoughts pulsed with symbols not yet spoken, like memories he had not lived. Cardinal Rafe stepped forward slowly, crossing himself, his breath fogged in the suddenly chilled air. "It's begun," he whispered. The seal of occlusion was never meant to stop people from entering. It was meant to keep them from awakening what lies below. The others, Saitel the geophysicist, Michael the linguist, and Delacroix the remote viewer, stood in a defensive half-circle around the platform, their flashlights flickering in sync with the resonance hum now rising from beneath the stone floor. Something was powering up, or remembering how to breathe. Elias recalled the manuscript's final reference to the Needle of Chronos, which was described as a device of alignment, not direction. According to Thorne, the needle wasn't a tool to find Atlantis, it was a mechanism to synchronize with it, temporally, energetically. Delacroix had brought with her a copper artifact unearthed from an Anatolian tomb decades ago. A cone with concentric roofs and an interior chamber filled with a swirling, non-Newtonian substance that defied classification. The manuscript had shown a sketch of this exact object. When they placed it at the center of the platform, the humming stopped. The ground beneath them gave a sudden shudder, then began to descend. Not rapidly, but with the unyielding certainty of ancient machinery reawakening after an age of rest. The platform lowered them into a vast shaft hewn through volcanic basalt. Walls glistened with veins of iridescent crystal, and etched into them were star maps not of Earth, but of constellations seen from a different hemisphere. Impossible alignments, as though from a time before the tilt of the Earth. At certain points, the inscriptions pulsed with light as they passed, illuminating faces of beings, neither wholly human nor wholly alien. At the bottom, the platform halted before a circular archway, sealed by a metallic iris, its surface etched with spirals that pulsed faintly in response to the presence of the needle. Without command, the iris twisted open with a sigh of escaping pressure, revealing a corridor submerged in pale blue light. The walls were inscribed with pictograms that matched none of Earth's known scripts, yet Mihail stared at them as if reading a forgotten language buried in his blood. "They're not writing," he muttered. "They're instructions, memories recorded as shapes." The corridor led to a domed chamber far larger than it should have been, its dimensions seemingly folded inward, creating a spatial paradox. At the center stood a massive globe, suspended in midair, rotating slowly. It depicted Earth, but not as it is. Continents were shifted. Antarctica was green. A massive landmass occupied the Atlantic. The globe's surface shimmered, and then without warning it cracked open like a seed, revealing an inner core. A city of glass rings and crystalline towers encased in a perfectly preserved stasis field. As they approached, the needle activated, sending pulses into the chamber. Lights cascaded across the ceiling in waves, activating sequences of glyphs, constellations, and harmonic tones. The temperature dropped sharply. The city inside the globe began to rotate independently, locking into alignment with the constellations above. Then Elias saw it, clearly etched across one of the inner towers of the city. Magister Aurelius Thorn's sigil. He had been here, not metaphorically, not as a scholar. He had entered Atlantis. Suddenly the chamber began to fill with images. Projections from the past. Visions flickered, a people wielding crystalline tools, moving monoliths with sound alone, energy flowing through aqueducts of light, beings entering and exiting portals like mirrors, and then disaster. The sky darkened, and a black sphere rose from the ocean, emanating a frequency so low it made the water bend. Towers cracked, portals collapsed. The Atlanteans screamed without sound as time fractured around them, and then silence. Delacroix collapsed, bleeding from the nose. Rafe knelt to help, but she reached up and clutched his wrist. "It's still alive," she gasped. "The city isn't dead. It's watching. It's listening through us." Just then the chamber's atmosphere changed. A low tone reverberated through the structure, not mechanical but conscious. It was not a voice but a question, a query that passed through them like a wave. The symbols around them shifted, rearranged into a single phrase they could all understand. "Why have you returned?" Elias looked at the city, then at his team. No one spoke. They had crossed the threshold between myth and truth, and now stood within the consequence. The Atlanteans had not simply disappeared. They had sealed themselves away, choosing entombment over annihilation, preserving their knowledge from the cataclysm they could not prevent. The manuscript was a key, the needle a lockpick, and they had just broken the seal. The city pulsed once. The air grew heavy. Time itself seemed to ripple. Rafe fell to his knees, weeping uncontrollably. The platform behind them had vanished. There was no going back. On the wall before them, a final glyph lit up, slowly rotating. It was a countdown. They had not merely found a map. They had become part of it. The countdown was not measured in numbers, but in pulses. Deep, resonant thuds that seemed to strike from inside the bones of the earth itself. With each reverberation, the chamber dimmed momentarily, as though time blinked. Elias Voss stared at the rotating glyph, mesmerized by its slow, deliberate motion. It didn't rotate like a symbol, it turned like a lock. Saito's instruments began short-circuiting one by one. Devices froze, batteries drained without cause. The temperature in the chamber plummeted to near freezing, yet the city within the globe, encased in its shimmering temporal shell, glowed brighter. Delacroix, still bleeding slightly from her ears, began murmuring phrases in a language none of them recognized, though Michael noted it bore resemblance to early Sumerian cuneiform, fused with Vinca script and a dialect long suspected to predate the Indo-European tree. Rafe stood at the edge of the platform, muttering prayers into the echoing dark. His crucifix, now dangling from his trembling hand, glowed faintly with the same blue light as the glyphs on the wall. He turned to Elias with hollow eyes. "This isn't just a city. It's a mechanism. We've activated something we were meant only to guard. The Church knew. They always knew. That's why the real maps were buried beneath Rome." He held up the obsidian fragment, now cracked. The fragment was the first lock, the manuscript the second, and the Needle of Chronos it's the key. Delacroix suddenly gasped and stumbled forward, her hand outstretched toward the globe. Her voice dropped into a guttural tone, no longer her own. "Chronos spins," she hissed. "Time uncoils, the cycle begins anew, the architects stir beneath the veil." As she spoke, the shimmering field surrounding the city thinned. Shapes moved within it. Not illusions, not recordings, beings. Tall, robed in flowing garments that shimmered like mercury, their faces obscured beneath fractal masks, and one among them turned. It looked directly at Elias. The eye beneath the mask was not an eye at all. It was a spinning vortex, a galactic spiral contained within a single point of perception. Elias recoiled, his vision fracturing. He saw images, flashes of architecture rising and falling, of pyramids beneath ice, of stars aligning with sigils carved into bone. He saw mankind's genesis, not as a beginning, but as a reset, a manufactured rebirth after a terrible cleansing, and through it all the eye remained, watching, recording, waiting. The countdown ceased. Silence. Then the globe split open, not with violence but with precision, like petals unfolding. Inside was not a city as they had known it, but a chamber, circular, metallic, humming with radiant pressure. From the center rose a crystalline spire, its surface flowing like water yet holding shape. The needle pulsed in Elias's hands, then jerked forward as if magnetized. He stepped onto the spire. The chamber responded. A cascade of light engulfed the chamber. Walls melted into vision. The team found themselves in a different world, neither past nor present. The architecture around them bent at impossible angles, with gravity shifting like breath. Through arched windows that opened into stars, they saw celestial alignments unfold in reverse. Saturn danced backward, the moon blinked out. Earth was different, not green, not blue, but scorched and raw. They were no longer in Atlantis. They were inside its memory. Rafe screamed and fell to his knees. "This is the day of reversal," he cried. "The Codex warned us. When the architects awaken, they will not reclaim, they will rewrite." He held up the crucifix again, but it cracked and crumbled in his hand. The laws that shaped belief no longer held weight here. This was a realm governed by the mathematics of gods, of those who built the lattice beneath reality. Mikhail collapsed. His skin began to glow faintly, his veins tracing glyphs beneath the surface. "They're writing through me," he gasped. I'm becoming a scroll." Delacroix floated now, her body suspended mid-air, her eyes open but unseeing. She spoke again, but this time the voice was legion. "The Atlanteans are not extinct. They transcended. When the flood came, not of water but of time, they sealed themselves inside this echo. You have turned the lock. You have become the signal." Suddenly the ceiling of the chamber cracked, and salt water poured in, suspended unnaturally in the air like tendrils. Within it swam silhouettes, elongated, luminous, watching. They circled the chamber like guardians, or jailers. Rafe began to pray again. but the words choked in his throat. Elias felt the needle vibrate violently in his grip. It pulled him toward the spire. He understood now. It was not just a key, it was a tether, a tool for bridging consciousness across ages. He was being pulled into the core, not physically, but mentally, psychically. The final threshold had arrived. Should he step into the spire, he would not return. It would become part of the city. A final voice whispered in the air, neither male nor female, neither young nor ancient. You sought Atlantis, but Atlantis has sought you for far longer. The light consumed him. Elias Voss did not fall. He dissolved. The light was not brightness, it was structure. Layer upon layer of perception uncoiled before him, vast architectures of thought and time that no longer adhered to the linear rules of Earth. He moved not with steps but with awareness. Space curved into patterns, and time folded like parchment. His identity, once held together by memory and name, began to blur into something older. He was standing, if such a word still meant anything, within a chamber carved not of stone, but of information. Its walls shimmered with flowing glyphs that spiraled like DNA strands made of light. The floor pulsed beneath him with what felt like a heartbeat, or perhaps a signal. At the center, suspended in a vast sphere of rotating runes, hung the Needle of Chronos, now transformed. It no longer resembled the copper artifact. It was colossal, spinning, alive. Elias felt a voice, not heard but impressed upon his awareness. It was not singular, it was a chorus, millions of minds woven into one. They spoke as the architects, the last remnants of the Atlantean consciousness, not flesh, not spirit, but recorded will, trapped, preserved, reverberating through the medium of time, waiting for resonance, waiting for him. You are the bridge, they said. Images flooded him. The true origin of Atlantis. It had not begun as a city, but as a fail-safe. The earth was once seeded, not by gods, but by engineers. The Atlanteans were not native nor colonizers. They were caretakers, guardians of a lock placed in the marrow of the planet. A lock that held back something older than the stars, something the first architects had no power to destroy. They called it the Deep One who dwells between frequencies. The Needle of Chronos was the ignition sequence for the containment field. The flood was not punishment, it was protocol. When the ancients lost control of the Deep One's frequency, they initiated a world-scale resonance collapse, sinking their own civilization to anchor the seal beneath tectonic mass. Atlantis was not lost in tragedy. It chose to be buried. Elias cried out, not in pain but in comprehension. The vision seared into his consciousness, the Deep One, vast and featureless, a living frequency wrapped in form. It existed in harmonic dissonance with reality. It fed on coherence, memory, meaning. It devoured civilizations not by tooth but by entropy. And now the ancient safeguards were breaking, one by one. The Vatican fragment had been the first, the Manuscript the second, the activation of the needle the third. He was offered a choice: return to his world as messenger, or stay as guardian. The cost of return would be great, memory would fracture, time would twist around him like a spiral staircase collapsing inward. He would be hunted, not by men, but by the Watchers, fragments of the Deep One that had escaped before the seal was complete. They live in ruins, in haunted places, in the silence between words. They would sense him the moment he emerged. Meanwhile, above, Delacroix lay collapsed on the obsidian floor, whispering Elias's name over and over. The globe had sealed again. Rafe wept silently, clutching the broken crucifix, while Mikhail's skin continued to pulse with sigils that no longer matched any human language. Then, without warning, the city's core shifted, the needle inverted. The globe cracked, this time for real. Water burst into the chamber in a column of roaring foam, but it did not drown them. It transported them. When Delacroix opened her eyes, she was lying on the shore of an island that did not appear on any map. The sand was black. The sky had no moon. The others were beside her. Rafe unconscious. Mikhail half-mad with glyphs still spiraling across his skin. And Elias? Elias stood at the water's edge, silent, changed. His eyes glowed faintly. In one hand he held the needle. In the other, a shard of obsidian etched with 7 symbols, 3 of which now glowed. Behind them, in the heart of the island, a tower rose from the jungle. Ancient, cyclopean, humming with a pulse that echoed the rhythm of the Deep One's prison. The countdown had not stopped. It had relocated. And far out at sea, beneath a storm that formed without clouds, something stirred. Something impossibly large. Something that had been listening. You found the map. You followed the path. But the final secret is not where Atlantis lies. It is what Atlantis was meant to contain. The sky cracked, not with lightning, but with sound. Low, unnatural, and still rising.